Hey guys, so we're back on the C18 here, and you can see in this video we're going to be mostly assembling, well, pretty much only assembling, but putting her back together. You can see how the front structure off here. We're putting the backing plate gasket on here just to make sure that it fits properly, and we got the right ones. And what I'm doing now is I'm putting silicone around the lower section here. Anywhere you have a 3-corner joint, you want to use some sealant, some silicone. At least that's what Kat recommends. And the reason is because you have 2 sealing joints, basically. You're going to have between the gasket and the metal, but then also the oil pan is going to bolt to that lower section also. So you're going to have a gap there. It's a good idea to use some sort of sealant. I've seen guys that don't use it and usually leaks. Now, was this leaking before? The front structure or rear structure were not leaking, but the customer wanted to reseal them since the engine was out. Is it the worst idea? No. Of course, anytime you don't have a leak and you end up resealing something, you risk having a leak there, but you also risk having a leak there just from time. This engine's over 10 years old, or about 10 years old now, so not the worst idea, especially with the engine being out. It is a big job, though. So you can see all the gears pretty much had to be removed other than the crank gear. I left the hub for the bowl gear on, but I did check the bolts on it. This is what they call the backing plate. So the front structure on these C18, C15s, anything like that, have a 2-piece front structure. Basically, they have this backing plate, and then they have the actual front structure itself. Now, one thing actually my mom said to me, she's like, it really makes me nervous having you under, because she watches the videos, going under these engines. I was doing the mains, not in the previous video, but 2 videos ago. The previous video was the front and rear main seals, but these blocks, the engine block that is, not the wooden blocks there, are pretty darn stable. And you might be saying, well, wouldn't it be safer to be under a lighter engine? I'd say not really. I'd rather be under a heavier engine like this, because if you have, let's say, a small block Chevy, it doesn't weigh a ton, a few hundred pounds maybe. So it's actually quite easy for you while torquing something to knock it off if you have it setting on blocks or an engine stand, something like that. Although an engine stand would be harder to tip over. When you have something like this cast iron cat block here that weighs well over 1,000 pounds, fully assembled, that engine weighs over 3,000 pounds. It's going to be harder to actually slide off or for it to get moved around. So it's actually a lot more stable. So I'd rather be under a heavier engine like this that's safely supported with jack stands and cribbing and stuff than a smaller engine. It's just easier to push those around. So what I was doing there is you could see I was installing. So there's several steps in order to get this correct. You can see I torqued the retaining bolts for the backing plate. I'm now lubricating what they call the bowl gear. I'm sure there's other names for it, but it's basically a stepped gear where it goes from a large to a small gear to basically run the cam and the accessories. So it has to be timed to the crank, but tell you the truth, the rest of the timing gear assembly here isn't timed necessarily, at least to the gears. The crank or the cam gear will get timed to the front housing, not to the other gears. So it is kind of weird that you time that gear, but it doesn't time to anything else, so whatever. So what I'm doing here is I'm putting some Loctite on the retaining bolts for this plate. Always do that. Anything behind, especially in these gears, I always Loctite them and torque them. And just, if you're someone that, doesn't have time to torque these bolts, especially ones behind gears or housings, maybe this isn't for you. I'm sure lots of guys have put engines just like these together without a torque wrench, but I really would be nervous about doing that. So since we got that on, we're going to put the hub here for the idler gear. So just making sure everything's lined up there. And I kept all the bolts separately for each set of idlers and everything, so there's no mixing and matching here. Same with this one. Has a few studs and 1 or 2 bolts. I'm just putting, as you can see, Loctite on all where the nuts go and on the bolt itself. We're going to torque those, and then we're going to slide the gear on. And it's pretty much same thing as I was doing on the other one, just torquing and tightening, and then we're going to install the gear. The next one, which is the one above it, you can't see it yet, but that's actually a sliding housing, so you could actually move that one to get your backlash to change. You don't have to do it with the front structure off. You can do it with just the peanut cover off, which I'll explain later in the video after we get the cam gear on. And hopefully, having basically aligned everything before starting here, shouldn't have to mess with the cam gear. But of course, we have a new head, we have swapped the cam gear, we've resealed the front structure, so things can move. It's a good idea to always check your backlash. Sometimes I hear of customers that they have a rebuild done and something's weird going on with their cam backlash or their timing, and they ask the mechanic or whoever did it and they didn't check the cam backlash. Always check the cam backlash, even if you're just removing the cam gear. Every time that head's off, you should be doing that. It's just a good idea. It does not take very long either. It's not like it's a super in-depth process. It's just something that you should do. Some of the stuff I do does take a long time. Some of the stuff later in the video, probably some things that people don't do. I measure the liner shims, for example. Do you have to do that? No, you don't have to do that. You can guess that what they measured from the factory was accurate, but I always like to do it myself. So, checking our gears here, making sure that they have some free play. If your gears have no free play at all, then you probably have a problem. So that's what I was just seeing, that they rock back and forth just a little bit. And if you've never seen behind the front housing on a C15 or C18 in this instance, although it'll be identical to a C15 or 34.6E, this is what it looks like. So we're putting the sliding hub on now. And this is really what sets your cam backlash. So you can kind of see I'm moving it, sliding it. There's a bolt hole here that no bolt goes in. It's kind of at the 7 o'clock position. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a bolt in there just to align it. And then I'm going to tighten this and make sure my red line that I had before matches. And like I said, I won't know until I put the cam gear on and check the backlash whether it's accurate or not. But I'm going to try and get it in the exact same position. You have a little bit of wiggle room also. You have 14 thousandths plus or minus 10 thousandths on the cam backlash. So if you're off, by 2 thousandths or something from where the original hub was, it's not the end of the world. It's probably still going to be within specification, so not a big deal. So we're just putting on the nuts and bolts. It is a mix of nuts and bolts on this sliding hub. Not exactly sure why they do that. I guess there's really nowhere for threads to go. Some of them, the ones that use the nuts, actually have these pass-through bolts that have seals, and anytime you have the backing plate off, make sure they weren't leaking or were loose. If they were, you can replace the seals for those. They're basically just a seal washer. Hey guys, so I kind of want to have a little sidebar here. So what am I doing? Well, we're on the C18 here, and you can see we have our liner shims. And I'm going to be measuring these because sometimes they're right around 30,000. Sometimes one's a little under, one's a little over. It's good to know, and sometimes it's a good thing to have one that's a little thinner or thicker, depending on how you cut yours. Now, luckily, using the brand new Monaco cutter here, these are pretty much as uniform as I could get them. They're pretty much all at 29 or 29.5 thousandths. So don't really have to worry about the matching the liner shims there. But kind of wanted to say today is Monday, that is Labor Day. And I'm working today, giving it its name, Labor Day. One thing you got to figure when you're self-employed is you don't get holiday pay. You don't get benefits. You can make more per hour, but yet those are worked hours. It's working for the dealer was nice in that respect. You got paid days off. You got vacation time. Now, I'm self-employed. I can take a vacation whenever I want, but I don't get paid 1 penny for doing that. So probably most people, maybe not most, but a lot of people watching this are owner-operators or mechanics that own their own business also realize that. But some of those worked for a dealer their whole life, you kind of don't realize that as much. That, yeah, and I don't get overtime, anything like that. If I work a long day, it's just the normal rate. So just things to consider. Let's get back to work. All right, folks, so what we're doing here is we're measuring our liner shims. And I've got my blow mold case here. It's actually got my depth mic, or as someone keeps pointing out, it's not a depth mic, it's a Dial indicator. Well, it measures thousandths, so it's a micrometer technically. And what I'm measuring here is it's basically a micrometer that measures kind of like a little C-clamp in. It's always a good idea to measure your liner shims. The last thing you'd want to do is, even though the part number says it's right around 30 thousandths, you put one in there, you put the whole, you know, piston assembly and the liner in and all the seals, and it was actually a 32, or somehow it got cut too shallow or something. So I always like to measure them. It's just a good practice. So we got our cylinder packs, folks. We've got our rubber band seals here. They are not O-rings because the liner is so much thinner. Kind of interesting, they got 2 orange, 1 green. Usually it's black, orange, purple, but that's on O-rings, not rubber band seals, I guess. So we need to engrave these. I always engrave on the tab side, so that would be, that's it. And it's always a pain engraving because I have an air engraver and a plug-in electric engraver, but I wanted a cordless one. I just got this kit on Amazon, not saying it's the best, but I haven't really used it yet. Hartle, I think it was like $20, but it's an 1/8 inch rechargeable die grinder. It's pretty cool. It's toolless, so you can tighten and loosen the bits. Comes with all these little bits. I don't know. Let's try it out. I just want to see if it'll engrave. I'm going to engrave number 5 on here. And that worked. I need to etch it a little harder, but yeah, you see the 5. It's hard with the lighting, but yeah, 5. I mean, it's engraved on there. That's easier. I'll take it. So we're getting ready to install these. So coolant is the green one, and then you've got oil, oil, orange, orange. So it's orange, orange, green. You also have another cat, Lucy. Meow. And yeah, got the new bearings, standard size. I had to verify our installation here since they're unlabeled, but yeah, you can see all the old ones. Coolant side is green, orange, orange, green, orange, orange, green, orange, orange. Right, kitty? So we're going to be installing the cylinder packs completely assembled here. I'm lubricating the liner seal area, which is on the bottom portion of the block here. Generally, I like to pull the liners and the piston assemblies apart, check the ring gaps, put a lot of oil on the pistons, just check everything out. The problem is this is a C18, as you know, and it is a 5.7 inch bore. Try finding a 5.7 inch bore piston ring compressor is extremely difficult. The only one I could find is close to $1,000 for something that you don't do very often. The 5.4 inch bore one, which of course fits the Cat C15, 3406Es, even the ISX and X15s. Those work great, but guess what? They don't work on this because it's 0.3 inches wider. So we're just going to be installing the whole cylinder pack here. I'm installing the pack there. What I'm doing now is I'm installing the filler band, which goes on the very top. And if you're looking at that, you might be saying, well, is that a Cam lube bottle? It used to be many years ago, and it's just an oil container now. So what I do is I soak the filler band in oil, which you're supposed to do, and then I wipe off the excess oil so that it's completely coated, the filler band, which is just kind of like a rubber band. And then right before you press the liner in place, you put this on there. I should have positioned the camera better. You can kind of see what I'm doing. I should have put it facing the other way, facing me. But, you know, not a professional photographer here, just making sure the filler band's not flipped or rolled or anything weird like that. Yes, I know my hair is all over the place. I don't really care about my hair very much. Just glad I have some. And then we're going to use our liner press here. This is a C15 liner press. It works just the same as on the C15. So it's got 2 bolts that basically hold the press in place, and then you put a plate over the liner itself, and then the centering stud there, which is tapered, just forces it in place. And if you listen real carefully, you can actually hear each individual seal go in place. Here. You can actually hear it if you could there. It'll start ran. That's all 3 seals going in place. Kind of cool. And if the other adjacent liners are out, I'll usually look around just to make sure none of the liners popped out or liner seals popped out or anything, but this one was fine. Okay, so we're doing our liner protrusion now. This is after they've been cut and new liners, cylinder packs installed. Well, reman technically, but pretty new. So using our Monaco depth mic here, or sled gauge as you'd say, but basically you want it, let's see, I've been getting between 5 and 6 on every single one, and this is 3. Went a little over, so let's move that there. Oop. When you're dealing with thousandths of an inch, which is each tick, it can be a little tricky sometimes. All right, let's see. Yeah, right about, pretty much right on 5. So yeah, holding with the consistent results here. We had a 5.5, 5.5, 5. These are our old readings. We did have a 6. That is where the O-ring goes, which I have the O-ring on there, so I'm wondering if that's possibly holding it up. I get about a 5.5 here, and then it's a 6 over here, but anywho, they've all been lows of 5s, highs 6, a couple 5.5s. Doing pretty good. Let's check this one, and then we'll have to move our liner protrusion bolts. What's weird is it'll move each time. Another 5. All right, guys, we are getting back together here, so you can see our head gaskets on. Mr. Cylinder Head. Customer has their own little A-frame here. This is one of the Harbor Freight ones. Yeah, Pittsburgh, but you know, not from Pittsburgh, if you know what I mean. They've got it's a 1-ton gantry crane. Try to back up so you can see a little better. Not as wide as mine. It's only an 8-foot width, which the added width would have been nice here, but it's pretty heavy. I think this weighs about 600 pounds. They've got a 2-ton trolley and then a 3-ton chain fall. Yeah, so I got this load leveler. It's an OTC one. It's about $90. I'm still using my chain hoist here, but this load leveler, which is rated at 1,500 pounds, is to balance the head. So this one's pretty simple. You just rotate it, and it'll kind of pivot the head where it needs to be. And since the head's about 500 pounds, this is well suited here. The lifting brackets I've got going to these. Next time I might go to these bolts, even though they're 3/8. Not a lot of good spots to lift this, but so far this is working pretty good. One thing I don't like about 3400 engines, C18 being included, is the amount of items between the head and the block. Now, this engine was developed around 1973, so it's over 50 years old, but they've added so many things over the years between the head and the block. So you've got your spacer plate shim, which is just a little steel gasket under the spacer plate. I don't even know if you can see it. Yeah, you can kind of see it right there. And then you've got your spacer plate. You've also got a 5-pawl 0840 O-ring under the spacer plate, and then you've got one above because that's your oil supply to the head. You've then got water ferrules. There's 24 of those. There's 4 around each cylinder. You've then got what I call the Oklahoma gasket, for some reason. Your head gasket, of course, and then you've got these new items, oil funnels, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's madness, folks. I mean, that's a ton of items to leak between the head And the block here, the C13s don't have any of that. They just have a head gasket. No spacer plate, none of that stuff. Much simpler head design. It'd be nice, but since that's kind of the base of the engine, you can't retroactively go back and just say, we're just going to get rid of that. Now we got to this, but still a good engine. Let's put the head on. So this is going to be one of the easiest heads to set. There's no cab, there's no firewall, no wires or anything in place. We're just going to extremely slowly roll this head closer. Technically, these gantry cranes are not supposed to be moved at all once they're loaded. I'm sure I'm not the first nor last person to do that. I really don't have another way of moving the head in place here. If the crane was longer, we could slide the head next to the engine and then do that, but it's kind of 8 foot is not that big of an area to work with. So yeah, what I'm doing there is I was putting oil on around the piston rings there, and then we're going to set the head down here, and this is obviously sped up. I do like this little load leveler I bought. It's the first time I've used it. Didn't really need to level anything on this one because usually an engine is slightly tapered down towards the rear, so it's on a slight degree. Usually the flywheel is slightly lower than the front, if that makes sense, in a truck application. But this, oh, there's a cat again, and this one wasn't. Obviously it's unblocked, so it's really flat. Really all I'm doing is just making sure all the seals are in place. I've got those 2 alignment dowels there. They're just going to make sure that this head goes on pretty much exactly where it needs to. And we're just going to set it on there. And once it's set on, we are going to torque everything. But right before putting anything on there, I just like to look around, make sure everything looks good, and final set down there. Once it's in place, I always check that the dowels, that it can't move. Shaking it there, and if there's no gap, good to go. Time to put the head bolts on. So we are getting it together here, folks. We are lined up here. I drew that line before. Put the front main in to indicate TDC. We are aligned on our camshaft. So if you don't know, this little hump here is the timing mark. Well, this one actually has a dot. Interesting. Anyway, so that's lined up. So I got to torque these. Don't forget that. We'll check our backlash. Let's check that after I torque it. We don't have the injectors in yet because I want to get the cam gear on first. Did get the big, really big flywheel on. Man, that thing's heavy. I mean, I didn't pick it up, but I did have to tip it up to get it on the gantry crane. That was a pain. But I wanted to get that on so we can pin it, which we pinned it here. So it's pinned, cam's timed. Let's torque the cam and then we'll check our backlash. So it's 180 foot-pounds for the cam gear bolts. And I get a lot of questions about, oh, should I use Loctite? Should I use anti-seize? Should I use what on what bolts? Cat generally will tell you what to use on what bolts. And cam bolts, no, you don't use anti-seize or anything. It just says install bolts. Doesn't say anything. Generally that means it's dry. So we're pinned. If you're not pinned, this would actually be rotating the engine around. Now, one trick that RT showed me, there's an alignment hole here. And what I do is I put a little red from the paint pen or whatever color paint pen you're using on the dowel just to make sure that it's seated in there. This is so much easier with having it out of chassis for the cam gear. Hopefully backlash is good. I don't have to mess with that. I haven't actually done that many front structures. I think this is my third, which might surprise you, but on C15s or this chassis. I've done quite a few on C7s, more on C13. I've probably done like 10 to 15 on C7 and 30 on 26s, and then Probably about 5 on C13s, but yeah, I don't know why. Really haven't done that many on the 3400 series engine. But done a lot of cam gears on them. So that's torque. I always go around just to check them all again after doing the sequence twice. There we go. Let's check Backlash. Anything that rotates, I like to generally do kind of a star pattern. I don't know why. Just looks cool. It's got some free play. Sounds loose to me, but the gears, there's no oil in the gears necessarily, so we'll have to measure it. Okay, so cam gear's on. It is timed, as you could tell, because the tooth is directly under the mark, so that's good. It has some free play. I do not have the rockers on yet. This is much harder with the rockers bolted down. Cat generally tells you to do it without them bolted down. You can see we have some free play. So the specification is 14 thousandths. There's a variety of ways to measure that. Kitty's here. Kitty! See? Kitty cat. Meow. She's been here all day. She must be lonely or something. That or I smell like cat food or something, I don't know. Anywho, so what I do is I have a variety of feeler gauges that are slightly notched, because a full-size feeler gauge will not fit in there. So 14 thousandths, and where you're going to measure is going to be between the teeth here. So that is, it's got a light drag. I'd say it's loose, if anything. So the spec is 14 plus or minus 10. So we're going to go up to a 24, which I have notched also. If the 24 does not fit, we're good. If it does fit, we're not good. So you don't want to measure here, obviously. It needs to be basically right in here where the closest. .24. There is no way that 24 is fitting. I can't weasel it in anywhere. If it was really, if it would go in but it was tight, I'd probably mess with it. But yeah, it's not even close. So we're somewhere between 14 and 24 thousandths. I'd probably say we're 16 to 18, just a guess, but yeah. So that's really good news. So our Backlash measures good. It's timed. Ready to install injectors and the overhead. So I got the overhead assembled here. It's got new injectors. Well, I guess technically they're reman. Reusing the rocker arms. They were in good shape. Got new bridges. Bridges come with the head. But yeah, doing this overhead. This is probably in the 3400 series engine one of the easiest overheads I've ever done. There's no Jake adjustment. There's no IVAs. It's sitting on a stand here. And these injectors adjust just like the C15s. They use the 9U7227 injector height tool. This one was 15 and 30 thousandths, the spec. I know on some of the C15s and C18 equipment engines I've done, sometimes it's 15 and 32 thousandths, but this one is 15 and 30. So just like most of the truck C15s. And yeah, it was super easy. Probably spent about as much time rotating the engine to get it pinned in the second location than I did actually doing the overhead. I probably did it in about 30 to 40 minutes, which, you know, usually if someone quotes an overhead, you're talking about 4 hours. But then that also usually includes pulling the valve covers and pinning it and stuff like that, which this one was already set. Super easy. Wish I could always do overheads this way. I would just, you know, I would bill them flat rate in that instance. Time for some paint here. Now, the customer themselves ended up doing most of the final touch paint here, but I wanted to paint before we got many of the major components on. Quite a bit of ventilation. We have both bay doors open, so usually if I'm painting in a shop where it's not ventilated, I wear the dust mask, but to tell you the truth, I'll get a headache even wearing the dust mask if I breathe any of these fumes in. So what I generally have found best to do is I'll come in, I'll paint for about 30 to 45 seconds while holding my breath, and then I'll step away, let all the fumes get out of the way, obviously breathe, and then come back in, and then hold my breath again and paint, and I don't get headaches that way. So I think that's probably the best way I've found to paint here, not be sucking it in all day. Hey guys, we're getting ready to install Mr. Oil Pump here. So remount oil pump. There's always a problem I've had with the oil pumps. They're hard to get the gear off sometimes, but more importantly, when you go to torque this bolt, it's hard to hold the gear. You don't want to pinch it in a vise necessarily. So I tried something. I've got this, it's an OTC turning tool, but it actually fits if you place it between the sections here. You can see it'll fit there. And then you can hold it and torque it. I don't know if that recorded right. Let me try. I'm trying to hold it with my neck here. Awesome. So just a little trick. You guys might even have this tool already, but it fits in there really good and it holds it from turning while trying to torque that bolt. So we're getting this valve cover base put on here. It's got the one-piece seal. So we're doing the injector harness, and I wanted to talk a little bit because there's a few things to the injector harnesses that you should know. Now, one is this is a single injector harness. There's no jakes or IVAs. And sometimes, of course, you have the dual type, but some people, they mark these because they think the orientation matters on the injector. The orientation does not matter on the injector. If your old injector, it was here, and you have to flip it over, it doesn't matter. Solenoids in general do not matter. I should say polarity, I guess, but something else with injector harnesses, at least on the cats, that most people don't know, or at least don't seem to know, they always have a number. Now this one's hard to see because Cat painted it white, but it says number 1. Number 2. What do you think this one is? Number 3. They're always numbered. And I've seen more than one occasion with even seasoned mechanics mix these up, or they swap them somehow if they're the type that's kind of more in the center. Always check that you're putting the correct numbered injector on so you don't swap them. Okay? Just something to say. Got our cam cover here. So there's one thing I don't like about cats is their Torx bolts. They're actually not even Torx. They're Torx Plus, which is slightly larger and slightly more rounded than a standard Torx. So great. These are usually behind the fan drive here, but that's still on the machine. So, well, actually no. It's somewhere outside. Now, someone had told me, and I do on occasion order bolts that will fit that are different. So the valve cover base bolts that are also 5/16 bolts, they're slightly longer, but they have a 3/8 shouldered head. I should have ordered those on this, but oh well. One thing I do different is Cat likes to apply thread locker to these for some reason. Not a fan. I will generally take and put, like on these, I have copper anti-seize. I put it on the threads and on the heads of the bolts, under the heads. Usually the bolts get seized to the housing. I shouldn't say to the housing. Usually they get seized to the peanut cover itself, not necessarily the threads, but it's a pain in the butt to get out. Need one more here, and then our nuts. I don't know. So we're coming together, guys, and this is something that's kind of unusual, but this, since it's a twin turbo, they both feed into the same exhaust collector. And you might be saying, well, what seals them? Well, it's almost like a piston ring. See? Or like a big snap ring. But basically, they just kind of slide in there. Nothing really holds them in. You have to have the housing on. So you have to put one in, then get the housing on. Then you can slide another one in the housing or the collector. Then you can put the other turbo on. So a little weird. We're going to get new rings. I think they're called rings. Ring. Yes. Okay. So yeah, these are the rings. It's a little catastrophic, and there's not a lot of table space in this shop, so I've got this box which is holding most of the other parts. But we're running out of parts. There's almost nothing left except for the exhaust system left on this to get put together. So, and I'm not sure. Yeah, it literally looks like a piston ring. It might be a piston ring. Oh, well, it broke like a piston ring. Yeah, so this truck over here, can't really see it very well, but it's right there. It's got a C13, and it was in this morning. This is at their shop, but for coolant loss, and you know, you always expect the worst, but it ended up being a hose was leaking, upper radiator hose, just to the point where it would drip out the middle of the hose, and then it would hit the fan, and it would just kind of spray everywhere. So it was to the point where it was leaking, but you wouldn't see drips on the ground because it was hot enough. It would only do it under like 15 psi of coolant pressure. So that was kind of interesting. But then while doing that, they were also doing the air compressor. Found that the pre-cooler was bad. So so it went from minor to somewhat major. Glad these are not seized. I could see these being seized. That would really stink. Now, I'll probably coat these in high temp anti-seize. I don't know if I should do that or not, but I probably will, just because these aren't going to have any sort of lubricant on them. There we go. And yeah, it'll probably help them stay in there better, not get bound up. Maybe, you know, I don't know. Is an exhaust component. My opinion, exhaust and high temp anti-seize just goes together. Peanut butter and jelly. Okay. So our new ring here. These ones are pretty brittle. There we go. Wow, look at how much. So the other ones were pretty much fully compressed there. You can see these pretty not fully compressed. Some sort of insect vehicle. Irritating me. Okay. Okay, well that was actually pretty easy. So I think what I'll do is I'll coat this puppy like so. Hey. Hey. Is that good or bad? I don't know. Theoretically, it should stay in there better. Almost need like a piston ring compressor for this guy to get it in there. Like get it that way. Up, come on. Come on. So I've got this side worked in. I think I could probably trying to hold the camera while doing this, but there we go. Cool. There we go. So yeah, it stays in, but it won't really fall out. Cool. Well, now I just have to mount all this other stuff. Well, folks, here it is. Or at least pretty much ready to go. Still waiting on secondary fuel filter. Obviously, the wiring to the starter and stuff's not on because that's all chassis side stuff. Don't have the valve covers yet. They took them to a powder coat shop, but apparently that takes 6 months to get done or something. So we're pretty much ready to go here. Changed, I believe, every single line. We got the fuel lines. I routed this one slightly different. It was routed weird when it came down on a 90. So what I did is I swapped it so that the 90's on the back. Try to keep stuff from not contacting each other. If it does, try to hold it together like here. There's not really anywhere else to brace that. I've got zip ties on pretty much all the wiring that I could. Waiting on that gasket. Intake is on the tube, so waiting on that. This does not have the, it doesn't have a coolant line because it doesn't have a filter there. Or filter, the air compressor. Normal fuel line here. Might do another coat of paint, but looks pretty much ready to go. Yeah, still waiting on the oil filters too. I don't know why. They reused the turbos. Try to seal them off as best I can. Can't be perfect though, obviously. Yeah, they changed filter housing. Well, I did, but they paid for it. Filter housing, oil cooler. It's got new thermostats, water pump. Yeah, it's ready to go. Ready to push some smoke out of this enormous stack. But yeah, once they're going to pretty much hook it up, and then I'll come out and program the injector trim files. And yeah, for now, it's going to sit here till they get it ready to go. So we got our all-star oil priming tank here, and as you can see, the engine has been put back in the grinder here. And basically I gotta give all the credit to Mark and Nick over here. They put the engine back in. I was out here priming it and setting the injector trim files, and then we're gonna see if it starts up. Here we go.
If you yell at me, shut it off.
Okay. It'll probably take a few crank cycles, but... Oh. Yeah, it started right up, ran really good. Customer's pretty happy with it. They still need to put some of the guards on and stuff. But yeah, this is going to be the conclusion of the C18 and the grinder. Hope you guys enjoyed it. How about a little destruction of the week? This week's destruction link comes from Mark, and this is a John Deere engine. And if you notice something, this roller is supposed to be over here. Yeah, and you might be saying, well, did it cause any other damage? Well, I mean, you could say that. Technically, it did. You know, it just dropped like every single valve into the cylinder, which of course destroyed the cylinder, better one of the valves into there, and destroyed the liner. Thanks for watching.